Okay, got it. All right, so hi everyone. I hope that you had a good lunch. Thank you for attending our session titled Preparing Elementary Pre-Service Teachers to Become Culturally and Linguistically Responsive Pedagogues. Advance. Okay, so we're going to quickly go around and introduce ourselves.
Hi, thank you all so much for being here. My name is Dr. Tammy Keces. I had the privilege of being a supervisor and lecturer this past year at the UCI School of Education, and I'm currently a principal at Los Coyotes Elementary School.
And I'm Evelyn Young, and I'm also a lecturer and supervisor in the MAT program.
I'm Makenna Toumaian. I'm an MAT multiple subject candidate.
Hi, I'm Amanda Oyama, and I'm also an MAT multiple subject candidate.
Sorry, we're a little bit slow here. I'm not quite sure why. Okay, so to launch our presentation, we would like to get a sense of how familiar all of you are with culturally and linguistically responsive pedagogy, and also your use of it in supervision. So you can go to the poll by either scanning the QR code or go to the link in the chat. Give me a thumbs when you're ready.
So the question is, how familiar are you with the theory of culturally and linguistically responsive pedagogy? We're just curious. Your name will not appear on the poll. It's anonymous.
Right, so here's the poll. So I have to make a disclaimer. We were playing around with the poll earlier. Just disregard the one that says, "What's that?" That was one of us. We couldn't get rid of it. All right, so it looks like many of you are pretty familiar with it and you can talk about it, but not quite sure. Okay, let's go to question number 2, which is, how frequently do you give feedback to pre-service teachers about how to plan and teach lessons in a culturally and linguistically responsive manner? All right, so for this one, we kind of have a split. So some of you do it very frequently and others of you not quite so much. Although we have only 7 data. So I don't know how accurate that is. But this is what we will do in our breakout room. We're going to give feedback to our candidates, Amanda and Makenna, on how to make their lessons more culturally and linguistically responsive. All right, and our third question is, how often do you find your pre-service teachers use CLRP to raise students' awareness to issues in the community? So for this one, we have 1 response.
I think maybe people are joining late, Evelyn. I don't know if there's a way.
Okay.
I see they can just click on, there's the link in the sidebar, right?
Yeah, we can put the link back in the chat.
Thanks.
Yeah, so we're kind of seeing the same thing. We know that we talk about CLRP, and we also know the students may know it and understand it, but we're not really seeing them use CLRP to raise students' awareness to social issues in their community. Denise, you had a question?
No.
Oh, okay. You had your hand raised.
It was by accident. Sorry.
Okay. All right, no worries. Okay, so let me go back to the slideshow.
And also, we're seeing that maybe we didn't give enough time to allow for people to scan the QR code, and we apologize. So let's make sure that people feel that they can contribute.
Yeah, absolutely. So I apologize for that. If you want to continue to contribute to it, the link is in there. We can come back and visit that later. Okay. Oh, the link takes you to the first question only. Is that right? Technical issues. My apologies. We've had so many of that today, right, Lisa?
Yes,
Well,
it's not fun, but
No, for sure.
even though we didn't get collective data, it's wonderful for us to just start planting the seed around what kinds of things we're going to talk about. So thank you for thinking about these questions with us.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we want to situate our talk by first drawing attention to the concept of culture. So you can see from this iceberg model that a lot of times what we see on the surface and what we talk about as cultural identities are mostly rooted in food, holidays, and language. But as you go a little bit deeper, there are unspoken rules such as rules of conduct, body language, or familial interactions. And then as you go even further deeper, there are unconscious rules such as concept of self and others, especially with regards to one's relationship to class, age, sex, and positionality. And we also know that there's a breadth of literature on culturally relevant, responsive, historical, and linguistic, relevant, sustaining pedagogies. There's so much out there on culturally responsive pedagogy, but we're going to situate our talk on Glasson-Billings theory on culturally relevant pedagogy, which focuses on these three tenets: one, promoting students' academic success; two, developing students' cultural competence in a positive manner; and three, raising students' social political consciousness. So, and how we implement this into our teaching practices is by asking this question: how can we leverage students' cultural identities and assets to promote academic learning and raise awareness to real-world problems? And culturally and linguistically responsive pedagogy builds on the three tenets of culturally relevant pedagogy and expands it into these 8 competencies. This is also found in the California Department of Education. And what I found in my supervisory practice is that most of the time students hit number 3, number 5, number 6, but rarely do they talk about number 2 in their lesson planning, which is to recognize and redress bias in the system or collaborate with parents and families in the local community. So in my own supervisory practice, I've been trying to develop a tool for supervision that focuses on equity. And the first column are the California Teaching Performance Expectations. There are 6 of them, and altogether there are about 42 standards, not including the substandards. So at UCI, what we've done was to narrow the practicum TPEs to what is only observable in student teaching practices, which you can see in column 2. Column 3, so what I've noticed that is limiting with the TPEs is that it really doesn't build students' critical consciousness. And especially around questions like, how do we cultivate students' identities in teaching and learning? How do we address disciplinary issues that are mostly rooted in middle-class ableist norms, or how we analyze systemic barriers that intentionally track students of color into failure. So the column 3 shows a list of readings that our candidates are exposed to throughout their coursework. And column 4 is a list of questions that I use in my supervisory practice as I give feedback to them on their lesson plans or in my post-observation feedback. So I did this for all 6 TPEs, and this handout is available to you in the resources folder for our session. It is not advancing, so I'm going to exit out of this and just do it the old-fashioned way. Sorry, my slides are not advancing. I'm not quite sure why. I'm going to stop share for a second and try to get out of this and try it again. Okay, so TPE 3, 5, and 6. Okay, so this slide here shows how getting students to think in a culturally and linguistically responsive manner takes time and practice. At the beginning of their student teaching, I would usually get something like this. Now, this candidate wanted to focus on the student's funds of knowledge, and by doing so, they will be substituting some of the words in the math problems to make a focus on Lunar New Year, which is a tradition that many of their students celebrate. So this is a typical math problem that we would get. Pull up the CLRP competencies that you just saw earlier, the 8 competencies, and let's analyze which of the competencies this particular lesson hits. So drop in a chat, which ones do you see this lesson hitting? And again, you can access the chart by going to the link or scanning the QR code. Right, so we see a lot of 3s, right? And going back to this slide here, it's drawing on students' culture to shape curriculum and instruction, but for the most part, it's pretty much on a superficial level. It's just addressing students' cultural holiday. But let's take a look at this next one. This one was in a paired placement, and the candidates wanted to teach an art lesson that also had a math element. So in this lesson, they wanted to make students see how art forms such as mosaic art can be seen within their communities, such as the Santa Ana Community College, or even in the people's homes. And also in their lesson, they use cognates such as quattro to connect to quadrilaterals. So again, going back to the competency slide, which of the competencies does this lesson hit? And this, by the way, was about 2/3 way into the student teaching placement. Lisa sees 4, 8, and 3. 4 and 7. 3 and 7. Okay, so we're definitely seeing a little bit more than just hitting 3. And these candidates are drawing on YOSO's community cultural wealth, and they're tapping into the students' familial capital and linguistic capital. Right, but we can definitely see that 2 and 7 are still not being hit, which is to address social political consciousness or bringing the community's voices in the lesson planning, which this lesson really could have hit. All right, so Tammy is now going to talk about TPE1.
I had the pleasure of connecting with Dr. Evelyn Young very early on in my supervision experience, and also spending a lot of time with our coordinator, Muriel Van Aspen, who we wanted to discuss how can we deepen and broaden students' development of TPE1 beyond that superficial cultural level. And so because I was supported as a supervisor in helping students develop this, it became really a vital focus for me as a supervisor. So that became a priority for me. I cared deeply myself about it. And then I found out Dr. Evelyn Young had that rich framework already developed. And she and I, it was like a meeting of the minds. We got so excited about how can we supervise students differently and start to really broaden their understanding of how to become more culturally responsive in their practice. And then this past quarter, taught the education of the history and culture of schooling in America. And what I found was that this was a missing piece. There was a gap in how students were understanding how to deepen their practice. And we, the School of Education at UCI, adopted Unearthing Joy by Goldie Mohammed, which really allows that practical information to come to the surface for students. So this book will become a part of the cohort this coming year. So if you can go to the next slide, the beauty of embedding this book into the students early on in their master's program is that it frames a deeper understanding of how to put culturally responsive education into practice. And I think that's the biggest gap of all, like the theory and the practice have been disconnected. And so the framework that Goldie Mohammed developed was her own method called HILL, that she describes as, number one, how do we become more developing their historical context. So there you go, right away, you're moving away from superficial cultural responsiveness and trying to understand history more deeply. How do we develop their identities beyond the superficial cultural identities? How do we strengthen and better understand the literacy and the language that we can use to also cultivate their culturally responsive pedagogical approach? And finally, how are we going to make a difference in the world using this practice to make change? And then to empower their voices through this idea of liberating and creating freedom when it comes to culturally developing self-advocacy in students. So this has now become a shift at UCI School of Education, that these current students that you're going to get the benefit of meeting today started to be exposed to this in their teaching experience. So the next slide really begins the conversation with supervisors and their students about how to learn about students' cultural identities. And this is something simple and practical that supervisors can use when they're having those conversations with their student teachers, their candidates. And it's really just kind of also going back and reinforcing these conversations throughout your supervisory experience to ask your students, who are your students? Do you know them? What do you know about them? Not just superficially, like you might see a student as being one race, but as we know, there are a lot of different ways of describing cultural identities, and really trying to pull that out from students is very important. Have they really experienced or understood marginalized communities, and what do they know about that within their own identities? And start to have those personal conversations with the student teachers, and to ask them what kinds of things within your identity and your students really cultivate joy and genius within who they are, and start to look at an asset-based approach to developing those culturally responsive identities. And also talk about, do you think your students feel loved, and are they seen? And how do you know that? What evidence will you know that will support you in this process? So this is the kind of language that I think creates a foundation towards culturally responsive pedagogical conversations with your student teachers. And now I'd like to introduce one of my students that I actually had the pleasure of supervising, both Makenna and Amanda. I did supervise Makenna for an entire year. So it was a really beautiful opportunity for me to see her evolution, starting with, I know I want to do this, but how am I going to get there? And so I'm going to turn it over to Makenna now to share a little bit about her experience developing her practice as a new educator.
Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about a lesson that I did in the spring that was in a first grade placement in Capistrano Unified School District. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please.
Oops.
So this was a history social science lesson focused on teaching US symbols. And so the standard and learning goal are listed there. I'll not read out the whole thing, but basically the original plan across the grade level team to teach this lesson was using these decodable passages that had been used in years past, where students were going to read them and answer questions. But I re-envisioned this lesson with my grade level PLC, knowing that I really wanted to build on all of the rich knowledge that students have about this content from their own lives and experiences. So we started by exploring symbols in students' own lives, because I knew they had so much knowledge about this. So we discussed what they believed a symbol to be and what symbols they could think of from their own lives. And I really wanted with this to promote those connections between their community and home to the content in the classroom. So they're able to think of so many things, like the fact that we use symbols in math and those stand for something greater. And they're able to think about logos that they see at home that stand for something. And even that our school mascot stood for like what we stand for as a school. And so students were able to draw on all sorts of these funds of knowledge and really utilize what they knew from their own lives and experience as an asset to access our learning. And then I engaged students in what I called inquiry posters. I'm not sure if that's like an official name for them whatsoever, but basically there's these posters around the room where there's a picture and the name of each of the US symbols that we were going to be focusing on. And students got to move around the room at their own pace, either writing a question that they had about the symbol or something that they already knew about it and stuck it on there. And everyone was walking around and reading what everyone else added as well. And I did this because I really wanted to ensure that all of my students had an opportunity to share what they already knew about symbols, because I knew, for example, I had several students with parents in the Navy or the Air Force that know a lot about our country and these symbols from their families, or I know students have likely encountered them in their own life, such as by when we do the Pledge of Allegiance every day and have the American flag, or maybe from celebrating holidays with their families. And so I really wanted these funds of knowledge and real life connections to be valued and a driving factor in our learning. And I also wanted students' own curiosities about the symbols and specifically questions asked in their own words in ways that utilize each of their linguistic repertoires to drive what we sought to discover in later lessons. And so throughout the next couple of weeks, we dove deeper into each of the individual symbols, and to start each lesson, we created a T-chart with one side of what we collectively knew as a class about the symbol and the other side, the questions that students had asked about the symbols, all in their own words to drive the learning. And then at the end, I prompted students to summarize what they had learned about symbols and demonstrate their understanding of what a symbol is by creating a symbol that represents something about themselves. And this emerged from feedback from Tammy as I was planning and submitting my lesson, and she gave me feedback of, I wonder how we could further connect this to TPE1 and really root it in their identities. So I found that the place for that in my lesson was in a closure activity. So I asked students to all create a symbol that represents something about themselves. So as you can see, the little pink post-it at the bottom of my slide is one boy who wants to be an actor when he grew up. So he drew a projector because he felt like that really represents acting and producing TV and movies. I had other students draw things like a heart, like for one student that really cares about animals, and she felt like a heart represented that about herself. And this activity really empowered students by allowing them to create a personal identity of who they are and see themselves as people with their own characteristics, as well as to learn about the different identities of others in our classroom as well. So that was my lesson. And going back to those components of culturally and linguistically responsive pedagogy that you scanned that QR code or have the link for earlier in the chat, I was able to take a lesson that was basically going to hit none of those components, and I was able to incorporate connecting the content. Thank you, Amanda, just send into the chat if you need it. I was able to connect the content in the classroom to real world factors. I was able to model high expectations for students by doing things like asking them to define symbols, asking questions to drive our learning, rather than just passively reading a passage that doesn't really communicate super high expectations. I was able to promote respect for student differences by having them create and display their own unique symbols that represented themselves. And I was able to lead to communicating in linguistically and culturally responsive ways by having them identify facts and questions about these symbols using their own words, and that has shaped our following lessons. However, in reflecting on this lesson with my team and planning for this, we identified ways that I could have even taken it a step further. So for example, I could have done a better job recognizing bias in the system and drawn more upon students' cultures to shape my instruction by really thinking about how America is such a diverse place. And just as with the symbols they created, there's all this diversity, and the notion of American contains so many ideas. And there's not just one way to be American, but oftentimes we are biased towards a certain narrative what being American is supposed to mean. And I could have even collaborated with families by asking them to identify or to share what ethnic identity they identify with, and even bring in a flag that represents that, so that we could discuss that even though the American flag is a symbol for America, there are really so many different identities within that notion of American. And so from all this, I really just took that culturally and linguistically responsive pedagogy is something that we should always be working towards, and really looking critically at our lessons to see how we can make them more responsive, as well as equally as important is reflecting on our lessons after teaching them and reflecting with others as well, and talking about different ideas to really identify like how we can make them even more responsive and more effective for our students.
Thank you, Makenna.
Well said, Makenna. So I had the pleasure of working with Amanda as her supervisor during her winter and spring quarters. And Tammy had her in the fall, so we can both attest to how strong of a candidate she is. To preface Amanda's lesson, she was already a very solid teacher. She was always mindful of incorporating students' assets and identities in her lesson plans and making sure that all students' voices were heard in group discussions, and also planning activities that allow students to interact with the learning content in multiple ways. So one of the lessons that she taught was on acids and the effect of acids on objects. And at the beginning of this lesson, she showed this video of someone pouring really strong acid onto a hamburger, and then the acid burned straight through the burger and turned it into liquid. And later on, she had the students work in groups and did hands-on activities to test weaker acids on bases and then to make observations of those effects. So all in all, it was a very academically rich and hands-on experimental lesson. But then during the post-observation conference, we talked about how she could have made the lesson more culturally and linguistically responsive. So some of the questions that I asked her were, how can this lesson be tied into students' cultural background or funds of knowledge? How are students and families exposed to strong acids in their homes or environment? What impact would long-term exposure to strong acids have on the human body? Which groups of people are the most affected by living or working in areas that would expose them to chemical substances that have high acidity levels? And so for the next science lesson, Amanda intentionally planned with CLRP in mind, which she will talk about now.
Thank you, Evelyn, for that great introduction. Just to kind of go into my student teaching before I go into the lesson, I was in a 5th grade student teaching placement in Santa Ana Unified. So I'll go more into my lesson. So as Evelyn mentioned, I was fairly confident in like teaching the science content and being able to like engage the students. For this lesson specifically, I focused on the standard of developing and like building a model, specifically an aquifer, for students to really understand how water can be found underground. But before doing this lesson, as Evelyn mentioned, we did have conversations. I had conversations with Evelyn, I had conversations with my mentor teacher, where I was trying to think of like ways to really include CLRP. And so what I ultimately decided was to add another component that builds upon the lesson I had already framed and connects the content to an environmental issue such as water contamination. So with this decision, it helped frame my learning goals, which are students will learn that water from the rain can be stored underground in aquifers. They will discover how humans have a large impact on fresh water in terms of contamination. So what that looked like for me was that we first made and hypothesized how water can be found underground. In the top image in my slide, you can see that this is like the model that we made together to kind of show that, and even like how to make a pond. And then from there, my added component was showing my students a side-by-side comparison. That's the bottom image you see. And what it is these dots are wells that are found in Santa Ana and its surrounding locations and areas. So also, as you can see, there are red dots and blue dots. So the red dots represent water that was contaminated from different chemicals, and the blue dots represent water that wasn't contaminated. So it's good to use. And so when I showed my students, they were very surprised to see that their areas, there was a shift in that water contamination. And so we started first talking about what was the cause, or what is the cause of what we saw. And as we further talked, we ended up concluding that the contamination was due to us and us not doing things properly, or the chemicals that we put out there in the environment. And so from there, we actually had to go deeper, and we actually brainstormed different like ideas of how we can improve like the water quality in these wells. So my students are really amazing. They actually came up with great ideas, such as they were talking about ways of disposing waste properly, and writing letters to the city council to express their concern for like change. And so with that, I think this lesson really did help shape our students into thinking more critically, not just about the science, but also the environment around them. So to kind of reflect, and there should be a link already for the CLRP competencies, I would say for myself that my lesson was culturally and linguistically responsive, in that I had the students reflect on one's cultural lens, have them like recognize and redress bias in the system, and have access to real world issues in their classroom. For the future, we also, as Makenna mentioned, we also reflected on areas that we could improve. So for myself, I would want to work on the other competencies such as collaborating with families and the local community. For instance, I could have gotten input from members of the students' community to implement a more personal and like relevant environmental issue for this specific lesson. So again, as I reflect, it's good to know that there are room for improvement, but I can see that the positive for this lesson was that it really helps students see the significance of science in like their everyday lives. And it showed them that they have the ability to address environmental concerns themselves, because that was like the focus at the end, was just letting them know that they have like agency and they have the ability to do something even at a young age. And I think that really showed at the end. So
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. So I mean, some of the takeaways that I'm hearing, or that I'm getting just listening to our candidates, is that it's not too young to address social political issues. These are, I mean, Makenna taught in a first grade class and Amanda taught in a fourth grade class, and they're dealing with real issues in their own community. And then second of all, I love how they are reflecting on their own teaching practices. We're not going to get CLRP right the first time, or the second time, or the 10th time, or the 1000th time, but we're constantly reflecting on how we can improve our practices and making it more relevant to our students. So at this time, we're going to go into breakout rooms, and we're going to allow you to self-select which room you want to be in. Makenna is going to, both of our candidates are going to share a typical lesson plan that you might get from your candidates. And they're going to go through like the standards and the activities. And what we would like for you to do is to put yourself in the role of the supervisor, and what kind of feedback would you give to your pre-service teachers on how to help them make their lessons more culturally and linguistically responsive. So pull up that 8 competency chart again, because you will use that in framing your conversations with the candidates. So if you want to do a first grade math lesson, you can go to Makenna's room. If you want to do a 4th or 5th grade science lesson, you can go to Amanda's room. And then they have put the link to the lesson plans in the chat. All right. So Lisa, whenever you're ready, we can let the participants select their own breakout rooms.
Created 2 rooms. So maybe if Makenna and Maddie go into a room, and then I guess I can rename it. I could say.
That's true. So Makenna, why don't you go to room 1, and then Amanda go to room 2.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm going to create the rooms. Yeah. Or at least
I created them, so you should be able to go. I'm going to join Makenna's room.
I can't get in there.
That was happening to me earlier as host. I couldn't go in. I don't know what's happening.
Okay, how do I join room?
See if I can put you in a room.
Okay.
No, you're not. Oh, here we go. Assign to which room do you want?
I'll go to 2.
Is everyone
No.
using a breakout room? Okay, you want me? I can assign you. Let's see. Jeannie, which room would you like to be in? 1. Okay. That's Makenna. Okay. Lynette, you want to be in a room? 1. 1.
I'd like a 1.
Okay. Where are you? Sorry, Helen, 1. Zoom users, what your name is. I know that's not your name. But... Lynette? Sorry, I can't hear you. 2?
Wherever you want to put me.
Okay. Grace?
And
Wait, sorry, let's see. Susie too, thank you. Whoopsie. Huh. Assign to two. Okay, Rebecca. Oh, Michelle, Dean, let's put you in one. Paula, thank you for holding the 2 and 2. Hopefully you're having the option to join now. Susie, 1. Okay. Grace. Oh, Edwina, are you saying 1? Okay. 1. Hi, Rebecca.
Hey, I'm on my phone and I'm seeing that may be why some of us can't get into breakout rooms because I don't see how to do it on my phone, but I would like to be in one.
Okay, let's see if this works.
Yes, I see that now. Perfect. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, of course.
All right, I think we are all back.
Yes.
All right, so here we go. Take it away, Tammy.
You know what, here we go. Okay, well, we would love, this was a quick session, and I just wanted to show an enormous amount of gratitude for all of the supervisors here. I was saying in our group that I really truly feel that this is one of the most impactful roles in the student teacher's experience. So thank you all for I want to say volunteering to make such a huge contribution to all these future teachers, for being here today. We'd love your feedback. So tell us a little bit about what was an idea, just anybody can answer any of these questions. What was one idea that you took away from the workshop discussion? How would you incorporate this now, culturally responsive and linguistic pedagogy, into your supervision? And what kind of challenges do you envision incorporating into your supervisory practice? And, you know, if anybody would like to just share out and answer one of these questions, we'd love to hear your voice. You could just unmute yourself and share out.
I just have a quick question regarding like the lesson planning, because I'm thinking about logistics, right? So the lesson planning in the supervision where y'all are working, is it you have a pre-conference and discuss the lesson before it's taught? Is that where the sort of magic begins?
Yes. So as Muriel Van Aspen, who's our coordinator, so she trains all of the supervisors in this process. And at UCI, one of the steps before we go and observe them is that the student teacher needs to turn in their lesson plan at least 24 to 48 hours before teaching, so that we can provide them feedback on their lesson plan. And that way there's still space for that conversation for improvement. And then, as you all know, there's often something in the lesson plan that isn't necessarily implemented. So it's great that you have the pre-conversation, you observe, and then you go back and reflect on whether it was in the lesson plan the way it could have been, maybe more expanded. So the whole reflection process is really important on the other side of that debrief.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Great question. Would anybody else like to share? I see your hand raised, Edwina.
Oh, I was going to say, Makenna's consideration of like the anticipatory set and background knowledge, or whatever she said, made me think about how some of the culturally relevant stuff, anything that has to do with equity and all of that kind of stuff, I have to bring in when I'm talking about the same things that make for effective teaching. You know, and then that's my opportunity to tie it in, and that because the suggestions or that would be related to those effective teaching things too. Because I don't know, I just think that a lot of things you do as effective teachers would be considering those type of things. As, okay, I'll tell an example is vocabulary. So on her lesson, you know, in the beginning, when you touch on the word Crayola, some kids know school Crayola, test, everything that they see. And then other students, whether it's economic or cultural, they don't see those or know those as readily as the other students. So you're addressing that need, you know, with the prior stuff.
Thank you. Yes. And you brought up an important point that we need to remember, that they're not just working on TPE1. We're helping cultivate all 6 TPEs and observing them over time to develop them all. So some teachers may come in with wonderful skills and be showing highest skill level in one TPE, even this TPE1, but we also need them to develop their ability to manage the classroom, and for them to be able to identify standards and implement the lesson with fidelity, with best practices. So, you know, we're looking at this first TPE in a context within all the other ones as well. But what we did notice is that this is one of the TPEs that is often developed after the other TPEs may be focused on, because you need to have those foundational other skills in place. But there's also maybe a lack of emphasis on TPE1 because it may be a little bit more challenging to talk through and to get through. So we want to sort of recalibrate ourselves so that students are developing, in fact, TPE1 in a deeper way.
So Tam, we have 2 minutes left. I don't know if you want to go to the last slide.
Sure, let's do that. So the final thoughts are that there's some takeaways and some challenges, but some future opportunities as supervisors. The first takeaway was kind of what I was just saying before, is to really, it's up to us as supervisors to determine what we're going to focus on. So to keep in mind the value of TPE1 and how you can now do that with these questions and these strategies that we were talking about. And number two, that we are saying that there are challenges with this. So to keep in mind that developing your relationship with your student teacher also is a part of this process, modeling for them your interest in them and trying to get them to dig a little bit deeper about their own identities. Maybe they haven't been working on that for them within themselves, and encouraging them and supporting them in how they can pull out and learn about their students more deeply, and then refocus on, well, how can we create more of a social justice framework? And they get excited about that, because that's when they start to feel like, wow, this is making a difference. I'm not just teaching them math, I'm teaching them how to affect change. And then they get really excited about that. And then ultimately, there's this book, this wonderful tool that you can bring in now, even if you just get a copy for yourself. I think that the students, this first cohort that I taught this past summer, they were really inspired by seeing a model with explicit lessons for social studies, for math, for art, for really cultivating historically and culturally responsive practices that they can put into place. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity here to continue our work. And I really appreciate all of you being here. So the final slide is that we'd love to connect with you. Please feel free to reach out. I am so proud of our students. I'm beaming personally watching Amanda and Makenna present. And I appreciate both of you. They're just about to graduate in the next few days. So thank you for your time and effort. And I want to acknowledge and appreciate Dr. Evelyn Young, who's been super instrumental for me personally, developing this framework. I think it's just fantastic for us to have this as a guide. And I want to acknowledge the UCI School of Education for being such a responsive and supportive program that allows us as supervisors to focus on this to support our student teachers. So a big shout out to, again, Virginia Panish, who was the director when last year, our new interim director, Susan Toumaian, and everybody else who's been such an impactful part of our development as educators. So thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you. Congratulations to Makenna and Amanda.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
You all.
This is your official graduation now.
Yes, and we will share the slideshow. Yes.
Please, yeah, that would be great. And then I
Cool.
posted the links for the next couple of sessions. So you
Perfect.
have them handy.
Thank you all.
We have a 10-minute break back at 1:50, sorry, 1:50. We can stay on for a second if people have questions or
Sure.
comments.
You post 4B, 4A and 4B. Did you post them
Oh
already?
yeah, sorry, that's what I meant, 4A and 4B. Did I say 3A and 3B?
Chat?
Oh,
No.
no. Okay, yeah, I put 4A and 4B in there.
Where are
Thank you
they?
guys again. Thank you so much. Have a
Chat.
great
So if you
take
go
care.
up in the chat.
I'm looking. I don't see it.
Oh, sorry, really?
Yeah.
I see 3A.
Oh, yeah, I meant
I
4A
did
and
4.
4B. So sorry. I'm getting twist it around.
So-
So let me do that again.
They
For-
are the correct links, just the wrong name.
Yes, sorry, 4A. Yes, they're correct. It's just I
Oh.
put 3A and 3B. Sorry about that.
Okay,
Getting my my workshops
okay.
confused.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
I'll wait a second so you can get
Quick,
those.
quick question.
Mhm.
Hold on, because I'm not seeing the link. Hold on.
I don't
Okay.
know if I'm getting it to work.
I can do it again if you want.
Okay, if
It's
you
a-
would. Thank
Oh,
you.
okay. Which one do you want? Both? 4A?
I want 4A.
Okay, let me put it back in the chat. 4A.
We can still get it the original way from our email if it didn't work, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. I don't know why it wouldn't be working. Let's see. It's working for me, but yeah, it's working for me.
Okay, hold on. I'm gonna go back.
Yeah, I can wait until you get there. What you could also do is, let me Zoom ID for 4A is 99.
Could I have 4B, Lisa? I had trouble getting into the sessions this after lunch.
Yeah, 4B, no problem. Let me pull up 4B. Or B. That one looks more straightforward. The 4A one, I don't know why it has all those extra numbers. But 4A, the meeting ID is that 99529.
Let me write that down.
That should work if you can't follow that link. Yeah, of course.
Okay, I'll just go out and come back in.
Okay,
okay.
sorry about that. Okay,
That's all right.
see you in a bit.
All right.
See you in 4B.